Welcome back to the Now Morning Show. I'm Kimberly D'Souza in your company, and we're going to be talking to an economist. We're actually going to be talking to Mr. Vaalmikki Arjoon. He's a finance lecturer at UE, and we're going to be discussing the devaluation of TNT's dollar, or the devaluation of our currency. What does that mean for us? What are some of the implications? So on the line right now is Mr. Arjoon. Mr. Arjoon, good morning, and thanks so much for joining us on Now.
Hi, good morning, and good morning to all the viewers as well.
Nice. Now, Mr. Arjoon, let's just let's move it along. So we're talking about the IMF report, and they were talking about the competitiveness of the domestic currency. So first of all, what does it mean to have an overvaluation of the currency? Because I believe they predicted that we might be over by at least 20%.
Well, to say that our currency has been overvalued or is overvalued is nothing new. We've been overvalued for many, many years now. Think of the US dollar as a commodity, right? As a commodity that you want to purchase. Okay, so at this point in time, we would usually pay about, let's say in the vicinity of about 6.73 or 6.7 TT dollars for one US. So you want to purchase one US dollar, you pay about 6.7 TT for that one US. Now, when the IMF says that we are overvalued, it means that that 6.7 that we're paying for that one US dollar is not enough. We really ought to be, given the level of demand, how intense our demand is for that US dollar, we should be paying a lot more for it. So we are not, because we're not paying enough for that US dollar commodity, as you could put it, and we say that the TT dollar is overvalued. I think that's an easy way for us to look at it then, where we're simply, the price then of that US dollar in TT terms, right, is simply not high or as high as it really ought to be if we allow simply demand and supply forces to take over fully and decide what that equilibrium price is going to be. At this point in time, and for many years rather, the central bank have been interjecting in the foreign exchange market, injecting a supply or on maintaining a particular supply of US dollars to maintain a particular exchange rate, to make sure that price of the US dollar relative to the TT dollar remains within a particular interval. So simply put, according to the IMF, we're not, or the price of that US dollar in terms of the TT dollar is not high enough. It's not high where it really ought to be if we were to just let the market forces prevail.
Well, on the flip side to that now, is it so then are we saying that we should devalue the dollar? And of course, what are the implications for doing something like that?
Right. Well, devaluation has always been looked at as a one-size-fits-all type of policy. So should we devalue the dollar? Right now, and for many years, as I mentioned, the central bank, they have been injecting US dollars into the system to try to maintain that particular exchange rate or maintaining it within a particular level. Now, you have to look at devaluation within the context of the environment, the context of the economy that we're in. So theoretically, from a textbook perspective, then we go in academic here for a bit, what traditional economics tells us is that a devaluation will make our local goods cheaper relative to foreign goods. So we might think that our exports will significantly increase and our imports will reduce because there ought to be a greater demand for our local goods. And under this scenario, the current account, our international trade account, our current account will improve and provide us with a greater influx of foreign exchange. And at the same time, the demand for foreign exchange will be lowered as imports would have fallen. And in addition to this, it will be touted that because of there's a higher demand for our local commodities, the profitability of our local firms should improve. So you find like manufacturing activities, retail activities, we would think that they would be enhanced, etc., paving the way for more economic, more efficient than economic diversification, more growth and prosperity in the country. Now, that all sounds lovely. It sounds like an excellent picture when we think of it that way. But is that actually going to happen in our reality if we were to devalue the TT dollar? And the answer is no. You see, we are so import intensive. Pragmatically speaking, we're very, very import intensive. We don't have a well-diversified production structure. We've been talking about things like diversification for decades upon decades upon decades, and we still haven't even scratched the surface as it pertains to getting the non-energy sectors as adequately diversified as possible, where they become self-sufficient. We don't have to rely on foreign commodities. These other non-energy sectors are self-sufficient, so we can have a certain healthy amount of import substitution taking place. What do we mean by that? If we do devalue the dollar, we may not have to import foreign items because foreign items now become more expensive. We can simply switch to local substitutes. But in many instances, do local substitutes exist? The answer is no. Take, for instance, the manufacturing sector. They tend to import the majority of their raw materials and their machinery for the production process and their daily operations. Essential goods like medication that many people actually have to take on a daily basis, they're 100% imported. And all these items are not locally available because we don't have the capacity as yet, we don't have the technical knowledge as yet, the institutional quality, and the money to be able to produce them, especially in the short to the medium term. So what we would find is that if we were to devalue the dollar, the imports level will drop a bit, the export levels will go up a bit, but not to the extent that we think it would. In fact, we would simply end up paying much more for the imports. So that would make the current account situation worse and make the price situation in the economy a bit worse, because remember, now you're paying more to import them in. When you pay now to more to import them in, that price is going to be transferred to the consumer.
So, Mr. Arjoon, so then rather than having the conversation about like overvaluing and devaluing, is it that we should just produce our local goods but at a higher quality and then raise the prices?
Well, no, we have to look at it from a more holistic perspective, right? To talk about devaluation or overvaluation, as you put it just now, I think we need to go beyond that and look at the entire situation in terms of foreign exchange management. Okay, foreign exchange management, where we have policies in place, a package of policies in place that are going to help the economy increase the production levels, not just in the energy sector, but in the non-energy sectors as well. So increasing production levels there as well. And of course, when you are growing in economics, we have a term called economies of scale, right? When you grow a particular industry, particular companies, etc., over time, and they tend to start mass producing, there's something called economies of scale. When they are mass producing, they produce at a lower cost. Okay, so we focus part of our policies, supply side policies, that is, on increasing production out of the non-energy sector, but we also want policies that are going to control the excessive demand for foreign exchange. You see, when we talk about a devaluation, as I mentioned earlier, is really making the price of a US dollar much more expensive. And of course, if something is more expensive, we would think that you would demand less of it. Mm-hmm. But if it is something that is essential, if you need that for your daily operations, your daily livelihood, about 95% of what we consume, if not more, on a daily basis are imported. So if you require that US dollar, that commodity, then even though you're making it more expensive, some individuals, some companies might reduce the demand for that item, that US dollar, but a very high intensive demand for it is still going to be there. So what we need to look at is a cocktail of policies, the fiscal policy, where we examine our taxation base or taxation structure in certain instances. We need to look at the monetary aspect of things and the supply side policy aspect of things, and also areas in which there are significant leakages of foreign exchange in the system. How do we plug those leakages? So, for example, there's a lot of investors, a lot of businessmen that keep foreign accounts abroad. There's a lot of capital flight, as we call it. They prefer to invest their monies abroad rather than keeping it here. What can we do to encourage these investors, these businesses, to keep those monies here so we don't have an outflow of US dollars? What can we do to provide them with higher returns in Trinidad and Tobago so that there's not an outflow? If we want to increase production out of the non-energy sectors, and of course, if we increase production in those sectors, then you're looking at not just satisfying local consumption, you're looking at also tapping into the greater export market, so you're earning more foreign exchange there. What can we do to improve the business environment locally in Trinidad and Tobago so that we can establish more organizations in the country, attract more foreign investment into the country, and therefore ramp up our production levels so we can export more and at the same time import less? Because whatever we're importing, We happen to have it right here in Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah. Now, Mr. Arjoon, I was just wondering, how does the pandemic factor into all of this? Is it that government is now going to be, well, have to be spending more on social services, of course, as the economy just starts to, resume operations?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that point about social services. You see, the pandemic, many organizations and individuals would have been very much displaced, especially when we would have had the lockdowns. But what we found going all over the world is that, especially more so in the developed countries, is that when economies reopened, there was a surge in demand levels and spending levels then in those countries. So what that caused was what that helped to exacerbate was supply chain problems. So suppliers are finding it very difficult to meet this intensive spending, this intensive global demand. That, of course, pushed up prices all over the world. And now, when you have an increase in energy costs, all prices are very high, and they've become even higher because of the Ukraine-Russia conflict. Global prices all over the world have been destabilized. They're so high right now. In fact, food items have never been as high as they are right now. It means we're already paying a high price for imports. If you devalue the TT dollar, you're going to pay an even higher price for these imports. Take, for example, a staple, flour. We import 100% of the wheat that is used to produce this flour from the United States. Now, if we were to devalue the TT dollar, in TT terms, we'll be paying more to import that wheat, which means now that the price of flour is going to go up even further. But who can, among our community, among the country, you have those in the higher income brackets and the lower income brackets. Those in the higher income brackets, many of them may be able to suck it up and pay a higher price for that flour. But those in the lower income brackets and those, I don't really like to use the term poor and poverty, but those that are maybe classified within that bracket will find it very, very difficult to pay that higher price of flour. So you're looking at making the vulnerable in society even more vulnerable if you were to introduce the policy of devaluing the TT dollar, because prices are going to go up even further. And when they become more vulnerable, it places an additional burden on the shoulders of the government. They may have to ramp up their level of expenditure, social expenditure, and social grants. For example, we have, for example, let's say the food card grant. They may have to ramp up expenditure in the food card grant to be able to help these people simply survive and be able to afford basic staple items like flour, for example.
Mm-hmm. Now, Mr. Arjoon, we only have a few seconds left, but I just wanted to get your final thoughts before we wrap. We have about 30 seconds.
Sure. Devaluation cannot be looked at as a one-size-fits-all item, okay, a policy. If we were well diversified, where we were producing the raw materials, the machinery, etc., here for the production process, if the non-energy sectors were very much well diversified, then it would have been easier to transition to a state of a devaluation, because we would have been able to switch to local commodities. But many of these items that we consume, that we need to consume, are not simply produced here. So devaluation should not be looked at in isolation. Again, we need a package of policies primarily geared to improving the way we do business in TNT, attracting more business into TNT so we can ramp up that production. And when you do ramp up the production, then you can start looking at gradually easing into that devaluation, because then you switch to local commodities, our exports will improve. And let's say at that point in time, if we were to devalue the dollar, the devaluation may not be that much, because the extent of the foreign demand for our local items will probably be quite high, because we're producing it and it's a bit cheaper.
Nice. Well, that was Mr. Vaalmikki Arjoon, who, of course, is a finance lecturer at UWI, just breaking down the overvaluation and devaluation. Mr. Arjoon, thanks so much for joining us here on Now.
Thank you very much for having me. Have a good morning.